The New Covenant. The journey of Captain James Monroe and the founding of New Hope, Massachusetts Bay, 1630 to 1635. Thank you for listening to this story. Please subscribe to Shadow of the Past on YouTube for more inspiring historical stories. Let us know where you're listening from in the comments. Chapter 1. The Crossing. The wind howled across the gray Atlantic like the voice of God himself, testing the faith of every soul aboard the merchant vessel Deliverance. Captain James Monroe stood at the helm, his weathered hands gripping the wheel as waves the size of houses crashed against the ship's wooden hull. Salt spray stung his eyes, but he did not blink, did not falter. Behind him, in the cramped quarters below deck, his wife Margaret and their 8 children huddled together in prayer, along with the 47 other souls who had entrusted their lives to his navigation and their futures to his vision of a new world. It was November of 1630, and they had been at sea for 9 weeks. 9 weeks of storms and sickness, of dwindling supplies and rising fear. 9 weeks since they had slipped away from Plymouth under cover of darkness, leaving behind everything they had known, their homes, their families, their country, all because they dared to worship God according to their own conscience, rather than the dictates of King Charles and his bishops. James Monroe was 42 years old, a ship's captain by trade and a Puritan by conviction. For 15 years he had sailed the trading routes between England and the continent, building a reputation as a skilled navigator and honest merchant. He had married Margaret Ashford when he was 25 and she was 18, and together they had built a good life in the port town of Plymouth. Their home had been modest but comfortable, their business successful, their children healthy and happy. But comfort and success meant nothing when the price was denying one's soul. The religious persecution in England had grown worse with each passing year. Archbishop Laud's campaign to enforce strict conformity to the Church of England had made life increasingly difficult for those who held Puritan beliefs. Ministers were being arrested, congregations disbanded, families torn apart. The choice had become clear: submit, flee, or face imprisonment, or worse. James had chosen to flee, but not recklessly. For 2 years he had planned this exodus, selling his business quietly, converting his assets to goods that could be traded in the New World, gathering others who shared his vision of a community founded on religious freedom and mutual support. He had purchased the Deliverance with his own funds, a sturdy merchant ship that could carry both passengers and the supplies they would need to establish a new settlement. Now, as the storm raged around them, James wondered if he had led them all to their deaths. The ship groaned and creaked, timbers straining under the assault of wind and wave. Water seeped through gaps in the hull despite the crew's best efforts to keep her sealed. The hand pumps worked constantly, manned by volunteers from among the passengers, fighting the endless battle to keep the vessel afloat. Below deck, Margaret Monroe gathered her children close. Their 3 daughters, Elizabeth, 16, Sarah, 14, and little Mary, just 8 years old, sat pressed against their mother's sides, their faces pale in the dim light of the swinging lantern. The 5 boys, James Jr. at 18, Thomas 15, William 12, Robert 10, and Samuel 6, tried to appear brave, but their eyes betrayed their fear. "Children," Margaret said, her voice steady despite the terror in her heart, "we must have faith. Your father is the finest captain on any ocean, and God did not bring us this far to abandon us now. We are his instruments, chosen to build a new Jerusalem in the wilderness. This storm will pass, as all storms do, and we will see the shores of the new world. We will build a life there of freedom and faith, where we can worship as our consciences dictate and raise you in the light of true religion." Elizabeth, the eldest daughter, clutched her youngest brother Samuel to her chest. She had been her mother's helper since she was old enough to hold a baby, and she had essentially raised the three youngest children while Margaret managed their large household. She was strong and capable, with her father's determination and her mother's compassionate heart. But she was still just 16, and the thought of drowning in the cold Atlantic terrified her beyond words. "Mother?" she asked, her voice barely audible above the storm. "What if we don't survive? What if God means for us to perish here as punishment for our pride?" Margaret took her daughter's face in both hands. "Listen to me, Elizabeth. This is not pride. This is obedience to conscience. We did not leave England because we think we are better than others, but because we could not submit to practices we believe contradict Scripture. God honors those who honor him, even when it costs them everything. And if we should perish, though I believe we will not, then we will perish in faith, which is no small thing." The storm lasted 3 days, but James Monroe never left the helm. He ate standing up, slept in shifts of minutes, and guided the Deliverance through the worst of it with a skill born of 20 years at sea and a determination born of absolute necessity. On the morning of the 4th day, the wind died, the clouds broke, and through the gap in the gray skies, weak November sunlight touched the wave-tossed ocean. The passengers emerged from below deck like souls climbing from a tomb, blinking in the light, barely able to believe they had survived. James Jr. climbed to the deck to stand beside his father. He was 18, tall and broad-shouldered like James, with the same piercing blue eyes and firm jaw. "Father," he said quietly, "how much longer until we reach land?" James studied the sun's position and consulted his calculations. "If my reckoning is correct, we should sight land within a week, perhaps less. We are in God's hands now, son. We have been from the beginning, but now we must trust him more than ever." 6 days later, on a cold, clear morning, the cry went up from the lookout. "Land! Land ahead!" Everyone rushed to the rails. There, on the horizon, barely visible through the morning mist, rose the dark line of the Massachusetts coast. The New World, the Promised Land. Margaret stood with James at the rail, their 8 children surrounding them, and they wept together, tears of relief, of joy, of gratitude to God for bringing them safely across 3,000 miles of treacherous ocean. Chapter 2. First Winter. The Deliverance sailed into Massachusetts Bay on a gray November afternoon, 11 weeks after leaving Plymouth. James had aimed for the established settlement at Salem, but the storm had pushed them north. They found themselves in a natural harbor protected by islands, with a peninsula jutting into the bay that offered high ground and fresh water. "This will do," James announced to his people. "This will be our home. With God's help, we will build a settlement here. We will call it New Hope, for that is what this represents. A new hope for all who seek to live in freedom and faith." They began unloading immediately, ferrying supplies to shore. By nightfall, they had established a crude camp with canvas shelters and fires pushing back the cold. Margaret organized the women to prepare a meal from their dwindling supplies. Salt pork and hard biscuit boiled into a stew that filled empty bellies. "Tomorrow we begin building," James told the assembled company. "We have perhaps 6 weeks before the worst cold sets in. The men will cut timber and construct shelters. The women will organize our stores and care for the children. We are far from home, my friends. We are in a land we do not know. But we are not alone. We have each other, our faith, and the determination to build something lasting." The days that followed blurred together. The men worked from dawn to dusk, cutting trees, shaping logs, building structures. James designed simple but solid buildings that would conserve heat and resist wind. A large common house first, then smaller family dwellings. Margaret organized the women with equal efficiency. Some gathered firewood, some prepared meals, some sewed warmer clothing, some cared for the children and the growing number of sick, because by the second week, illness had begun spreading through the settlement. By December, they had lost 4 people, 2 children and 2 adults. The frozen ground made digging graves nearly impossible, but James and the men broke their backs chipping graves from the earth, giving their dead proper Christian burial. And then, on a cold December morning, when frost covered everything, the natives arrived. James Jr. saw them first. "Father," he called, his voice tight with tension, "there are men in the woods. Natives." I counted at least a dozen. "They're watching us." The settlement went on alert. The men grabbed weapons. James ordered the women and children into the common house. His heart pounded as he wondered if they had escaped persecution only to face death in the wilderness. But when the natives emerged from the forest, they came slowly, deliberately, their hands empty of weapons. There were 15 of them, dressed in leather and furs. The leader was perhaps 50, with gray in his dark hair and wisdom in his eyes. He stopped 20 feet from James and raised one hand in what seemed a gesture of peace. Then he spoke in a language James did not understand. James stepped forward, keeping his musket lowered. He pointed to himself. "James Monroe." Then he gestured to the settlement. "New Hope. We come in peace." The natives studied him for a long moment, taking in the rough buildings, the thin people, the desperation visible everywhere. Then he spoke again, mixing his language with a few English words. "Cold, winter, you die." The words struck James like a blow. He searched the man's face and saw not hostility but concern. The native gestured to the buildings, shook his head, then pointed to the woods. Then Margaret emerged from the common house. She walked to James's side and looked at the leader. She touched her chest. "Margaret." She pointed to the settlement. "Home." She gestured to the children. "Family." Then she looked at the natives questioningly. The leader's expression softened. He touched his chest. "Metacom." He gestured to his people. "Wampanoag." He pointed to the ground. "Our land." Then more gently, "You die. Winter kill you. We help." Chapter 3. Building Together. What followed transformed both peoples. Metacom returned the next day with more Wampanoag, including women and children, a sign of peaceful intent. They brought gifts, corn, dried meat, furs against the cold. Through signs, drawings in dirt, and the few English words some knew, they began to communicate. The Wampanoag showed them how to build better shelters that trapped heat more efficiently. They taught them to find food in winter, ice fishing, snaring rabbits, gathering pine nuts. They showed them which trees burned best and how to find dry wood after snow. In return, the English shared what they could. James repaired metal tools using his shipwright skills. Margaret and the women shared cloth and needles. The children played together, teaching each other games, learning to communicate despite language barriers. Elizabeth Monroe found herself drawn to a young Wampanoag woman named Wawetseka, about 20 years old, who served as translator. Wawetseka had learned English from traders and spoke it well. The two women spent hours together, Elizabeth teaching English while learning Wampanoag, building a friendship that transcended their different worlds. Through Wawetseka, Elizabeth learned about the Wampanoag way of life, how they moved with seasons, hunted and fished, planted crops in fertile valleys, how they had lived on this land for countless generations, understanding its rhythms and secrets, how they viewed land not as property to be owned, but as a gift to be used wisely and shared. "Your people," Wawetseka asked one day, "why leave your home across the great water?" Elizabeth explained carefully. "In our country, the king says we must worship God in his way. If we refuse, we are punished, imprisoned, sometimes killed. My father and mother believe we must worship as our conscience tells us. So we came here to be free." Wawetseka nodded with deep understanding. My people too. We know what it is to have others tell us how we must live. The English who came before, some respect us. Others see us as animals, as obstacles to clear away so they can take our land. We must be careful about who we trust." She looked at Elizabeth seriously. "That is why Metacom watches your people. He sees you are weak, that you will die without help. But he also sees you came with families, with children, that you work together and care for each other. He sees your father speaks with respect, does not demand, but asks. So Metacom decides to help. But this help is also a test, to see what kind of people you are, to see if you will be neighbors who live in peace, or enemies we must fight." Elizabeth took Wawetseka's hand. "Tell Metacom that we want to be good neighbors. We want to learn from you and share with you. We don't want your land or to push you away. We only want a place where we can live in freedom and peace. And we believe that if we work together, we can all prosper." The deep winter months of January and February tested them all. The cold was unlike anything the English had experienced. Snow piled high around the settlement. But they endured, and they did not endure alone. The Wampanoag visited regularly, bringing food, offering advice, sharing warmth during the worst storms. When illness struck again, Wampanoag healers came with medicines made from bark and roots. They could not save everyone, but they saved enough to make a difference. Through these dark months, bonds deepened. James Monroe and Metacom spent long hours in conversation, with Wawetseka translating, discussing survival, but also deeper questions of philosophy and belief. James was fascinated by Wampanoag spirituality, by their sense of connection to the land and all living things. Margaret and the Wampanoag women formed their own connections. They taught each other skills, English sewing techniques for Wampanoag methods of tanning leather and weaving plant fibers. They laughed together despite language barriers, finding that the universal experiences of motherhood created common ground. The children integrated most seamlessly. Young Samuel Monroe, just 6, became nearly inseparable from Metacom's grandson, Kimi. They played in the snow, built structures, taught each other games, learned each other's languages with the effortless adaptability of childhood. The older boys, Thomas, William, Robert, joined Wampanoag youths in learning to hunt and track. James Jr. spent hours with elders, learning star navigation and seasonal patterns. Each skill learned was not just survival knowledge, but a bridge between cultures. In late February, Elizabeth and Wawetseka had a conversation that would shape the future. "What if," Elizabeth asked, "we didn't just live near each other? What if we truly built something together? A community where both our peoples live side by side, where we share land and resources, where your children and mine learn from both our traditions." Wawetseka considered this carefully. "It is a beautiful dream. But dreams are easy. Reality is hard. Your people and mine are so different. We see the world differently, worship differently, live differently. How can we build together when we don't even agree on what we are building?" Elizabeth leaned forward intensely. "That's exactly why we should. Because we are different. Because we have different knowledge, different skills, different ways of seeing. Together, we can create something neither of our peoples could create alone. Your people know this land. Mine know building and trade. Imagine what we could accomplish together." Chapter 4. The New Vision. Elizabeth brought her vision to her parents that evening. James and Margaret sat with their eldest daughter by the fire, listening as she described her conversations with Wawetseka, her ideas for a truly integrated community. "Father, Mother," Elizabeth said earnestly, "we have a chance here to build something unprecedented. Not just an English settlement that tolerates natives nearby, but a real community where both peoples live together, learn from each other, share in governance and prosperity. Isn't that worth pursuing?" James was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames. Finally, he spoke. "When we left England, we were fleeing persecution. We wanted freedom to worship as we chose. But freedom is hollow if we simply recreate the same patterns of dominance and exclusion we fled from. If we claim the right to live according to conscience, must we not extend that same right to others?" He looked at Margaret. "What do you think, wife? You who have worked alongside Wampanoag women these past months? You who have seen their wisdom and kindness? Could this vision Elizabeth describes become reality?" Margaret smiled. "I have watched them teach us how to survive in this land. I have watched them share food when they had little to spare. I have watched them tend our sick with medicines we did not know existed. They have shown us more Christian charity than many Christians I have known. Yes, husband, I believe it could work. More than that, I believe it should work. It is the right thing to do." And so a new vision was born. Over the following weeks, James and Metacom met repeatedly, with Wawetseka translating and Elizabeth often present to help clarify ideas. They discussed how such a community might function, how land would be shared, how decisions would be made, how conflicts would be resolved. It was not easy. There were real differences in worldview, in custom, in belief that could not simply be wished away. The English believed in individual land ownership, the Wampanoag in communal use. The English emphasized written laws. The Wampanoag relied on oral tradition and consensus. The English structured time by clocks and calendars. The Wampanoag by natural cycles and seasons. But gradually, through patient dialogue and genuine respect, they found ways to bridge these differences. They agreed that land immediately surrounding New Hope would be held in common, available for use by all. They agreed that major decisions affecting both peoples would require consensus between English and Wampanoag leaders. They agreed that both traditions would be honored in education, in worship, in daily life. When spring arrived in late March, melting the snow and bringing new life to the land, it brought also a new beginning for New Hope. The Wampanoag helped the English clear land and plant crops, corn, beans, and squash in the native style, alongside English wheat and barley. They taught them to plant fish with the corn as fertilizer, to let the beans climb the corn stalks, to let the squash spread beneath to keep weeds down. Three sisters, the Wampanoag called these crops, working together in harmony. It became a metaphor for the community they were building. Different peoples, different ways, but working together in harmony, each supporting the others, creating something greater than any could achieve alone. As spring turned to summer, the community grew. More Wampanoag families moved closer to New Hope, building their traditional wetu dwellings near the English houses. English families began adopting some Wampanoag practices: lighter clothing in summer, certain cooking methods, ways of preserving food. Wampanoag families began using some English tools and techniques they found useful. The children became truly bilingual, switching effortlessly between English and Wampanoag. They played together without thought of difference, creating games that blended both traditions. They attended lessons together. English taught by Margaret in the morning, Wampanoag stories and skills taught by elders in the afternoon. James Jr. and several Wampanoag young men formed a hunting party that operated together through the summer, bringing back deer and other game that was shared among all families. Elizabeth and Wawetseka organized a group of young women from both peoples who worked together on major projects, preserving food for winter, preparing materials for clothing, helping families in need. By harvest time that fall, the community had not just survived, but flourished. The fields yielded abundantly. The stores were full. No one went hungry. No one lacked shelter. And when they gathered for a great feast of Thanksgiving in October 1631, exactly 1 year after their arrival, both peoples came together to celebrate. James Monroe stood before the assembled community, English and Wampanoag together, and spoke words that would be remembered for generations. "My friends," he said, Both those I came with and those we have met here, we have learned something profound this year. We have learned that strength comes not from standing alone, but from standing together. We have learned that different peoples, with different ways of seeing the world, can find common ground when they approach each other with respect and open hearts. We have learned that the stranger can become friend, and the friend can become family. He gestured to Metacom, who stood beside him. Metacom and his people saved our lives this winter. But more than that, they taught us how to truly live in this land. They shared not just food and shelter, but wisdom, patience, and friendship. They did not have to help us. They chose to, out of compassion and generosity of spirit. And what have we given in return? We have shared what skills and knowledge we possess. But more importantly, we have opened our hearts and our community. We have not claimed this land as ours alone, but recognized it belongs to all who treat it with respect. We have not sought to change our Wampanoag brothers and sisters to be like us, but celebrated our differences while finding our common humanity. Metacom stepped forward and spoke, with Wawetseka translating. He said, "When we first saw your people, we saw weakness. We saw strangers who did not know the land, who would die without help. We could have let you die. We could have driven you away. Some among my people argued we should, that allowing you to stay would bring trouble. But we also saw families. We saw children. We saw people who worked together and cared for each other. We saw respect in your eyes when you spoke to us. So we decided to help, to teach, to watch what kind of people you would become. And you have shown us something unexpected. You have shown us that not all English are the same. You have shown us that different peoples can live in peace, can learn from each other, can build something beautiful together. You have kept your promises. You have treated us as equals, not as obstacles or servants. You have honored our ways while sharing yours. So today, we do not celebrate your harvest or our harvest. We celebrate our harvest. We celebrate this community we have built together. We celebrate the friendship between our peoples. And we commit ourselves to continuing this path, no matter what challenges may come." Chapter 5. New Hope Rises. The years that followed saw New Hope grow into something unique in the New World. By 1635, 5 years after that first desperate winter, it had become a thriving community of nearly 300 people, roughly half English, half Wampanoag, living and working together in remarkable harmony. The physical town reflected this integration. English-style houses stood alongside Wampanoag wetu. The central meeting house, built collaboratively, incorporated design elements from both traditions. A school taught children in both languages. A marketplace where both peoples traded goods operated on principles of fairness established by joint council. The government of New Hope was equally unique. Major decisions required consensus between an English council led by James Monroe and a Wampanoag council led by Metacom. Minor disputes were handled by a joint court that applied principles drawn from both English law and Wampanoag tradition. It was not always smooth. There were disagreements, misunderstandings, tensions, but there was also commitment to working through difficulties rather than resorting to violence or separation. The economic prosperity of New Hope drew attention throughout Massachusetts Bay. The combination of English and Wampanoag agricultural knowledge produced abundant crops. The integration of English building techniques with Wampanoag understanding of local materials created structures particularly suited to the climate. The blending of English trading networks with Wampanoag knowledge of interior routes established New Hope as a vital commercial center. Other English settlements took notice, some with admiration, others with suspicion. Some saw New Hope as a model worth replicating. Others saw it as dangerous, a betrayal of English identity, a threat to colonial plans that depended on treating natives as inferior peoples to be displaced or dominated. But within New Hope itself, The community's unique character was simply normal life. Children who had known nothing else grew up bilingual and bicultural, as comfortable with Wampanoag hunting skills as with English reading and writing. Young adults formed friendships and eventually marriages across cultural lines. Families from both peoples helped each other through hardships, celebrated joys together, mourned losses together. Elizabeth Monroe and Wawetsuka, whose friendship had helped spark the community's formation, became its strongest advocates. Now in their early 20s, they traveled to other settlements, speaking about New Hope's example, encouraging others to seek cooperation rather than conflict with native peoples. Their message was not always welcomed, but they persisted, believing that the path New Hope had pioneered was not just possible, but necessary if the English and native peoples were to coexist in the new world. James Jr., now 23, had become a leader in his own right. He had married a young Wampanoag woman named Ashawa, and their son, the first child born of both peoples, was celebrated throughout New Hope as a symbol of their shared future. James Jr. used his navigation skills to establish trading routes, always careful to maintain the respectful relationships his father had pioneered. Margaret Monroe, now in her 40s, had become the community's heart in many ways. She ran the school, organized care for the sick and elderly, mediated disputes between families, and generally ensured that the practical needs of daily life were met. Her respect among both English and Wampanoag was unmatched, and her wisdom was sought on matters large and small. James Monroe himself, now 47, often reflected on the journey that had brought them here. They had fled persecution, seeking only freedom to worship according to conscience. What they had found was something far greater, a community that transcended the divisions of the old world, that showed it was possible for different peoples to live together in mutual respect and shared prosperity. On a warm summer evening in 1635, James stood on the hill overlooking New Hope with Metacom. They had become genuine friends over the years, these two leaders who had begun as strangers. They watched the sun set over the community they had built together, the houses and fields, the people moving about their evening tasks, children playing in the square, smoke rising from cooking fires, both English and Wampanoag. "It is good," Metacom said in his improving English. "What we have built, it is good." James nodded. "It is more than I hoped for when we arrived. We came seeking merely to survive. Instead, we found a way to thrive. Together." Metacom was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You know this cannot last forever. Other English come. They do not think like you. They want our land. They do not want to share. They want us gone. War may come someday." James felt a chill despite the warm evening. He knew Metacom was right. Already there were troubling reports from other colonies of conflicts between English and natives, of land disputes, of violence. New Hope was an exception, perhaps only a temporary one. "Then we will show them another way," James said firmly. "We will prove that cooperation brings greater prosperity than conflict. We will teach our children the value of what we have built here, and they will carry it forward. And if war does come, New Hope will stand as an example of what might have been, what still could be if people choose respect over domination." Metacom smiled sadly. "You are optimistic, my friend. But perhaps that is good. Perhaps hope is what we most need." They stood together watching the sunset. Two leaders from different worlds who had chosen to build a bridge rather than a wall, who had created something rare and precious in a time of division and conflict. New Hope would face challenges in the years ahead. They both knew that. But for now, on this summer evening, they could look at what they had accomplished and know it was worth every struggle, every compromise, every moment of doubt. Because they had proven something important, that different peoples could live together in peace, that respect and compassion could bridge even the widest gulfs, that the stranger could become friend and the friend could become family. New Hope stood as a testament to what human beings could achieve when they approached each other with open hearts and willing spirits. And that legacy, whatever the future held, would endure. Epilogue. A legacy of hope. The story of Captain James Monroe and the founding of New Hope is a testament to the power of compassion, mutual respect, and cooperation. In an era often marked by conflict and division between English settlers and Native American peoples, New Hope stood as a shining example of what was possible when people chose understanding over fear, partnership over dominance. The Monroe family and the Wampanoag people led by Metacom created something unique, a community that honored both traditions, that saw diversity not as a threat but as a strength, that proved different peoples could work together toward common goals while maintaining their distinct identities. Their success was built on simple but profound principles. Listen before judging. Learn before teaching. Respect what is different. Celebrate what is shared. Help those in need. Build together what cannot be built alone. These principles remain relevant today. In our own time of division, when differences of culture, religion, language, and background so often become sources of conflict, the story of New Hope reminds us that another path exists. It shows us that cooperation is possible, that mutual respect can bridge enormous gulfs, that compassion can overcome suspicion. The children of New Hope, growing up bilingual and bicultural, showed that the next generation need not inherit the prejudices of their parents. The marriages across cultural lines demonstrated that love recognizes no boundaries that humans draw. The joint governance proved that power could be shared equitably. The economic prosperity showed that cooperation yields greater benefits than competition. Was New Hope perfect? No. Were there tensions and disagreements? Certainly. Did it require constant work to maintain? Absolutely. But it existed. It thrived. It showed what was possible, and that matters. As we face our own challenges of building inclusive communities, of respecting differences while finding common ground, of cooperating across divides, the story of New Hope offers both inspiration and instruction. It reminds us that the work is worth doing, that the results can be remarkable, and that each of us has a role to play in building communities marked by respect, compassion, and mutual support. May we learn from Captain Monroe's courage in leading his people to a new land. May we learn from Margaret Monroe's wisdom in building relationships across cultures. May we learn from Elizabeth and Wawetseka's friendship that bridged two worlds. May we learn from Metacom's generosity in helping strangers. And may we learn from all the people of New Hope, English and Wampanoag together, that our shared humanity is stronger than any difference that divides us. Thank you for listening to this story from Shadow of the Past. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel for more inspiring historical stories. Leave a comment and tell us where you're listening from. We love hearing from our global community.